Hi, this is Jim Anderson with Psalm Tree CFO, and we're going to talk about biblical business ownership. Owning things is fundamentally a good thing and gives us the opportunity to glorify God with them. But at the same time, it can provide temptations to sin. First, owning things is acknowledged biblically. And we see this in Exodus 20, verse 15, where it tells us not to steal. How can you steal from someone if they don't own anything? We're imitating God when we own things. We are imitating God's sovereignty over something that God has put in our charge as stewards of what He has created. When we own things, we take care of them like He takes care of the universe. And when we do that, we demonstrate many of God's characteristics in our own behavior. We don't absolutely own what God has given us. This is because of what it says in Psalm 24, verse 1, in Leviticus 25, verse 23, in Psalm 50, verses 10 through 12, in Haggai 2, verse 8, in Luke 16, verse 12, 1 Corinthians 4, 7. God has given us an innate desire to own things. And you can see this in children when they are playing with their toys. They have a natural desire to have sovereignty over things like God does. There's a difference between this desire and greed. When we call this desire greed, we're making it a bad thing. How could something that God gave us be a bad thing? It was meant for good. However, we can distort it. We can distort this desire by being selfish and lazy. It pleases God to see us taking care of what He has given us. Whether it's simply a computer or an entire business. Taking care of what we own is acting as an image bearer. And we represent God on earth. So how do we glorify God with our business ownership? Well, first, it's to make good use of the resources that we have. Ironically, it might mean giving some of it away to others that will use it wisely. Specifically, that might mean making sure that we give a portion of what we make to our church and to organizations that lift up the poor. We can see the Bible telling us about this in Hebrews 13, verse 16, in Proverbs 3, verse 9, and in Acts 20, verse 35. Doing this should be fun, and it should be rewarding, and it is. I have experienced this, and being able to give and help others is so personally rewarding. And we can see this in the Bible. It tells us in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. As Christians who have God's love in us, we are going to enjoy this. We experience our love for God and for those around us when we do practice generosity. In Genesis 1, verse 28, it tells us that we are to have dominion over and subdue the earth. Now, this is another way to glorify God with our business. We are using the earth's resources, the earth that God created, and we're doing more with those resources to make it more useful for us. When we do this, when we extract resources from the earth to create computer chips that we use in cell phones and computers, for example. This incredible technology that we have created glorifies God. It demonstrates the creativity and the power in that creativity that He's given us to do things with His creation. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 17, we are instructed not to put our hope in our possessions. We're just meant to enjoy them. In 1 Timothy 5:8, it tells us that we are to use our wealth to provide for the members of our household. It is essential that we are grateful for what we have, no matter how little or how much. That gratefulness is key to our success and how God sees what He has given us. And we need to seek to glorify Him with what He has given us, not to be selfish with it and do things with it that God did not intend for us to do. What are the things that we need to avoid doing with what God has given us? Well, we need to avoid accumulating wealth for its own sake. We need to avoid feeding our pride with this. This is a big one. When we become business owners, we really struggle with pride because we've created something that we can really be proud of. But we give ourselves too much credit. God is the one that gave us the skill and the opportunity to build that business and to build that wealth. If He didn't give us the ability to do that, we wouldn't have it. It's not in our own power that we did that. So we need to understand the necessity for humility as business owners. That we own this business at the pleasure of God, and He can take it away in a moment, which is another thing we need to avoid doing with our wealth, is putting our trust in it, that we find our security in all of the wealth that we have. When we have a lot of money sitting in the bank or in our investments, we have enough of it. We feel the more we have, the more financially secure we feel, and that can come between us and God as we depend less on God. We see the Bible warns us of this in Matthew 6, verse 1, and in James 5, verse 3. And then there's the parable of the rich fool in Luke 12, verse 13 through 21. When we neglect the needs of others and live in excessive luxury, that's another thing that we need to avoid. That is something that hardens our hearts towards others. And it tells us that, it warns us of that in James 5, verse 5, and in 1 John 3, verse 17. Now, I want to make the point here that it's not ownership of wealth that's bad. It's abusing it for our own selfish purposes that is bad. Ownership of things is really morally neutral. The ownership is granted by God, and we should be thankful for what we have and use it to glorify God. So how can you use your business to glorify God? Would you still be grateful to God if you lost your business?